You're listening to The Novice Experience, a podcast that explores the opportunities and challenges commonly encountered by students and young people. I'm Calvin Chan, and chatting with my guests, I'm going to take a deep dive into their meaningful stories, the lessons they've learned, and how they can inspire others. Let's get going. Hey everybody, welcome to the second episode of The Novice Experience. I'm very excited to have Carlos Young join me for today's episode. He's been a friend for, I think, 14 years now. One of my best friends.
A
Yeah,
very, very long time.
that is a very
No,
long time.
longer than that. Longer than that. We met in what, second, third grade?
Yeah, about. Um,
How old are we at that point? Yeah, 15 years, man. 15 years.
Man, we're so old.
I mean, comparatively maybe, but it's been a while. It's been a while.
Yeah, for sure. And Carlos, do you want to just start off with telling our listeners sort of an origin story? So, like, where did you come from? What are some of the most defining moments in your life that make you who you are today?
Wow.
Why don't you start off with that?
Defining moments, defining things maybe. I'm a
Sure.
musician at heart, and I suppose in what I study and what I do daily. I'm a musician through and through. Obviously, for a person, passions and the hobbies are another deal. But as a whole, musician. Chinese Canadian, Hong Kong. I was born there, and then when I was 18, I made the very brave choice of moving across the world to another continent, and I'm staying there for the foreseeable future. So I'm currently, in Europe, finishing my degree and looking forward to starting a career, which is daunting, especially, I suppose, a bit more information as a classical musician. I'm a violinist. And with, COVID having happened and all this other stuff going on, I'm guessing careers and stuff are going to be a little bit daunting, but hey, we're here to tackle this one step at a time.
Right. And we're going to get into sort of your degree and your transition to college, moving
Yeah,
to a different continent and so on. Before we get to that, though, I want to do something sort of fun on the podcast. I'm going to do this segment called Give Me Five. And it's sort
right.
of like a rapid fire question thing. And so I'm going to fire you different questions, and you can make them as short or as long as you want. You don't have to elaborate.
Cool.
You can give one word answers, but it's sort of
Sure.
a fun thing where our audience can get to know you more. So the first one, I know that you've traveled to many places in the world, yourself or
Yeah.
with family and friends. Which is your
Yeah.
favorite country?
Japan, without even thinking. I don't even have to like. There is no. I'm. I wouldn't call myself a weeb, but I love Japan. Every time I've been there,
Right.
it's been mind-blowingly amazing, and it's just people, food, culture. It's comfortable. It's clean. Everything's super advanced, and like every time I go there, I see something new. I experience something amazing, and hands down. If you guys want to go, I would. I mean, I haven't been to all of Japan, obviously, but Tokyo is a great place to start. Osaka is also great, and if you really really like seafood more than anything else, go up to Hokkaido. That's, in my
Right.
opinion, some of the that's where some of the best food is for sure.
Yeah, Japan is so unique. All the culture, the food, the things you can do there, everything is unique
Oh,
to that
totally,
country.
totally.
Uh, Second question, name a dish you like that's not mainstream or totally underrated.
Ooh, a dish I like that isn't mainstream. That's an
Yeah, or that's underrated.
okay. I don't know. I don't feel like this is necessarily underrated or not mainstream, but then recently I've developed for myself a little bit of an obsession. There's a specific sushi called inari, and it's like sushi rice, and they wrap it in this sweet, like a bean curd or like a tofu kind of pouch. I'm sorry if any of the Japanese people listening to this are like crying right now, but that's sort of I don't know if it's necessarily underrated or not mainstream. It's offered in most all Japanese restaurants, but I've just been really really into it recently.
Right. That I'd love to try that one day.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We're already getting somewhere.
Third question. I know. So you said you're a musician. Other than
Yeah,
the
sure.
one you play, name your favorite instrument. So anything
Um,
that's cool, like what do you like best, other than the other
Other
than
than
violin?
violin, that's a difficult question to ask a musician. Um, that's hard. That is actually hard. I would say recent. That's not quite true. I've liked this instrument for a long time, but I've been picking up the electric bass or trying to, and I
Mm,
think bass. Both technically they're different instruments, but then I adore both the double bass and the classical. I know the classical double bass and the electronic bass. I think they're both really really cool instruments, and man, I mean ensembles, bands. If you don't have a bass, you're gonna feel it. They're very important.
right. Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, I look forward to hearing you play the guitar.
We'll see. I have one. I haven't really picked it up yet. Non-equal tuning between strings is very difficult for my head to wrap around.
Right. Fourth question. I know you like comics. Who's your
Oh,
favorite
totally.
superhero?
Deadpool.
Deadpool. I mean, I love Deadpool.
I've been reading Deadpool comics since I was 7. I think probably a terrible thing for a 7-year-old to read Deadpool. Probably teaches you some not so good moral lessons, but
Right.
yeah. To date, I think I own. I can confidently say that I own every issue of Deadpool that was printed between like 2004 to like 2010, and like probably most of what comes after, but I cannot be completely sure about that. But yes, Deadpool is my favorite. um I don't know, I just think he's probably one of the more interesting characters because
Hmm.
for the earlier runs he had this special little thing where he you could read that he had two little voices in his head and he'll talk and interact with them. There's orange voice, which is like very childish, and then there's white voice, which is mature, and then you can kind of watch his psyche and understand what really he's thinking. um and he's sort of in another way a very sad character because in a lot of the
Yeah.
comics he wants to be a good guy, right? He wants to join the cool superhero teams, but then he kind of comes off as a dick. So I adore Deadpool. I think he's a fantastic character.
Definitely near the
That, or I
top
would
of
have to
mine.
say, go for it. Yeah, he's amazing. Either that, or I would give it to Old Man Logan because
Oh
oh, what
yeah.
a story. Have you read the Old Man Logan comics?
I have not read much
Oh, they're
comics, I gotta say,
so good.
regrettably.
If you can pick up Old Man Logan or even find a way to like read it online, it's so worth it.
Great. Yeah, there you
Very
go.
very.
A new hobby to get into for sure.
Yeah. Oh, the expensive one. I'll tell you that.
Okay, last question on our rapid fire segment. What's your favorite board game?
My favorite board game. You know what? Sadly, I have not been playing that many board games recently. So
Hmm.
I that's sort of difficult for me to say. I mean, we've played Monopoly together recently. That was very fun.
Yeah, I mean that's my favorite board game. It's very cliche.
Yeah.
I love how it's very different each time,
Yeah.
and the negotiation that goes into it. The the relationship part of the game. That's really fun to me,
Totally.
and it changes with each player, and that's why it's
Yeah.
so new every time.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I'm a bit more of a Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop
Right,
RPG sort of guy. So board
right, for
games
sure.
are sort of a different matter, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into our sort of interview here.
Yeah. Sure.
So, Carlos, after we graduated from high school together, you went to King's College in London to study your bachelor's in music,
Yeah.
brackets honors.
Sure did.
And after
Yep.
that, you're now in the Masters of Music program at Codarts Rotterdam in the Netherlands. But before you got to
Yes.
these two schools, obviously there was a planning ahead sort of period in grade 12 where you were like, okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I got to do all these auditions, I have to do applications. What was going
Mhm.
through your mind at the time? Could you share with us some of the feelings, if there's any like high schoolers out there who's looking to get to fine arts?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I think I was just very optimistic. I think there was, as an artist, and as you grow with your art, you sort of come to have a confidence in yourself, and very much so, sort of an idea of who you are as a person and as a musician, and what you can do, what you can't do. You have a very clear image of that. And when I was doing my applications, I thought to myself, yeah, I'm great. I'm fantastic. These guys are gonna love me. And I suppose I was somewhat cocky in choosing the schools I decided to apply for, because, well, actually, they ended up not taking me at all.
And what are the schools that you applied to
Oh,
that?
I went for the big boys. I applied for the Manhattan School of Music. I applied for Juilliard. I also
Mm-hmm.
applied for the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, the Royal College of Music in London, and the Schulich School of Music, which is part of McGill University in Montreal. They're genuinely some of the best music schools in North America. Of course, there are a few more in California and also Peabody in Indianapolis, I believe. But I kind of went big. I decided to just chase the great names and these amazing places that I knew of at the time, and that was, I sort of, I suppose I was so confident in myself that I didn't quite plan for a what if they don't take me sort of uh, scenario. And I just went and I applied and I flew out. I was lucky enough that some of them decided to give me a live audition, but I didn't think
Mm-hmm.
too much actually. I just thought I would make it and I would apply for all the schools I wanted to go to.
But would you say for most artists, it's important to have that confidence there, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure.
In your performance and how you perceive, you want others to perceive you while you play your music. But did you think that was a false sense of confidence that sort of hindered your ability to plan ahead and make reasonable choices, or did you think that was, if you were to do it again, would you still have that confidence?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think, having that confidence is very good, but at the same time, I think for me, at the at that time in my life, I probably just wasn't exposed enough to what the standards out in the real world were like. It was sort of like a big fish in a small pond sort of deal for me, and I was confident, and I know probably back then I wasn't a terrible violinist, and by no means was I a bad musician, but there's a discrepancy in the standards, I suppose, of where I was and where I thought I was at the time, and what these schools were looking for. And I think at the end of the day, this sort of confidence is very, very important. You have to love what you do and be able to stand in front of people and just be like, hey, this is my art. If you like it, you like it. And if you don't, you can just leave. I
Hmm.
think art without passion and art without confidence like this ends up being, well, not very artistic at all.
Yeah,
Um,
I sort of feel like that swagger of an artist. Perhaps that we can think of particular celebrities where we don't really like their vibe or their swagger, but they're really popular in a way because they sort of represent what their music's all about. It's unique.
yeah,
I remember like someone like a Lady Gaga got a lot of flack when she came out, right? Just so like how she presented herself, but she
right,
wanted to be unique. She wanted to
right.
stand out,
And
and that
Gaga is a
yeah,
phenomenal musician.
right.
Genuinely mind blowing. If you listen to any of her stuff without the theatrics, if it's just her and a piano, her voice is massive, amazing.
I agree for
True,
sure.
truly.
And now that you've been through King's College and
Yeah.
now at Code Arts,
Hmm.
what's different about these schools that you've come to realize that maybe you weren't really aware of back in grade 12 when you were looking for colleges. So, like, what's sort of different uh, about these schools that have influenced your music?
Oh, yeah. Well, the degree at King's College is slightly more academically focused. Um, and certainly I was not expecting that in 12th grade. When you look at, what resources you have, and certainly for me, when I was talking to my friends from more practically focused conservatoires, the ideas, what you do is very, very, very different. I was expecting to go in, practice, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, work till I cry or my fingers start to bleed, and then, go to bed and wake up and do it all over again. But, I think being in an academically focused music program actually opens up a very, very different aspect of music making that I think a lot of people in conservatoires might lose out on. Certainly, I ended up reading textbooks and trying to analyze things and be well acquainted with history more than I did, sitting there and practice all the time. By the end of the day, I think this sort of degree and this sort of approach gives you a more well-rounded idea of the music. Currently I'm doing a research project. Research project. My entire master's research is based upon Prokofiev's first violin concerto, and I can actually quite safely say that if I didn't, have the basis of knowing how to do proper research, going through literary sources, and picking out relevant information and being able to compile this research into, an actual readable thing, my interpretation of the music would be very different. And so I
Mhm.
think the big difference in the degrees that I've worked with so far has been that, yeah, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of stuff outside of just practicing my violin all the time. But now I think I've actually got a better idea of what I'm actually doing. Hours and hours of musical analysis and history and knowing Prokofiev, knowing his life, knowing what he like, sort of his ideas of composition. That ended up, for me, I think, as a big benefit, because not only can I look at a work now and be able to say it comes from this time, this era, there are these characteristics about it, having that theoretical academic knowledge is sort of like standing on a base of useful information, and you can just apply that into playing. And I think that's kind of the biggest difference. I still practice all the time right now. I probably did about 4.5 5 hours today. The rest of the time I worked on trying to analyze this piece. And I think if you go into a conservatoire for very, very practically focused curriculums, you end up losing these sorts of valuable research and kind of analytical skills that can actually be very helpful.
Yeah, totally. I agree with you. I mean, I did piano personally with the Royal Conservatory of Music here in Canada,
Right.
and part of the testing is that you do analysis
The
and also
harmony classes.
the harmony and the history classes, and
Oh, those
I
are difficult for
always
me.
they were very difficult, but I appreciated the history side. Like what you said, it helped me understand sort of the art that I'm performing in a
Yeah.
present modern day,
Yeah.
where the audience might not really understand where the composer was coming from at the time.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was having understood the history behind it, I was able to better present the emotions and the story and the background behind the piece. And I totally agree with you. But just so we're clear, when you say it's more academic, at the
Hmm.
colleges that you've been to,
Hmm.
what would it have been if you were doing this at the big schools that you were you were applying to? Like, would it be more practical, more performance based,
Yeah,
competitions?
it would definitely be more performance based. Well, to be fair, I have not gone through these programs myself, but at the time, talking to some of my friends that were in these programs and with my professor. So when we're at King's College London, you get a teacher from the Royal Academy, and I was very very lucky to have. Michael Foyle, who is now a complete real professor, teach me for all of my 3 years there. And he told me actually quite a bit about what happens during the degree. And I think the difference is just that they don't, like theory lessons and harmony lessons and history lessons are a thing. They're still a thing, and the students there in that more practical program still do them, but at a very sort of different depth. So through our degrees, it's a bit more of a deep dive on various topics, specific composers, and you end up having to write 4,000 word essay, and you finish the degree with a 10,000 word dissertation. As far as I can gather, and please correct me if I'm wrong, all this essay writing and research stuff is pretty dialed back in the other programs. There's
Right.
definitely more of a focus towards playing and playing damn well.
And sort of when you compare the different schools in music, it reminds me of sort of our process of picking, colleges or universities.
Yeah.
There are some schools that are, more hands-on, more practical, as compared to, the big institutions where they're more academic. Tell us about what you learned in terms of picking schools. Like, do we have to, cast a wider net? Do we
Mhm.
have to be open-minded, or take more risks in terms of where we want to study? Like, what have you learned from this process?
I think the biggest thing I learned from this process is that being rejected means very, very little. And at the end of the day, you can fail, you can start late, and you can start over. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think there's a lot of pressure nowadays. And people, obviously, you don't want to fail at something, right? You approach a situation and you want to do well. That's perfectly fine. But I think a lot of the times people end up being paralyzed by their own fear of failure and sort of fail to acknowledge the fact that failure is absolutely normal. And you can fail 100 times in life. Might not really matter so much as the one success you're going to get at some point, you know? I think that's the
Right.
biggest thing I learned. Obviously, when you're applying for schools, I was rather, I would say, slightly overly confident in my abilities. And yeah, be safe. Don't just apply for the best places and expect to be able to make it. You know, be safe and pick some other choices, second choices. And another thing is just because you get it doesn't really mean you have to go.
Mm-hmm.
I would wager that you're probably better off waiting and getting into a program that actually works for you and that is actually good than just trying to get into a place and say that you're studying or go into a school that's nice but not quite right for you. I think
Right.
in time, looking back, certainly that like I have no regrets about having gone to a more academically focused degree. um, I loved my time there. I love all the people I met and all the great experiences I went through. And I think it ended up, sure, I got rejected by all these great schools that I wanted to go to, but do I think that, you know, I would have ended up as a worse musician because I'm here? Like, would I have been better if I went to those schools right now? Debatable. I would certainly be a very different person with a very different approach to music. Hell, I may not even be playing anymore. But just because I had to go and do something that wasn't what I planned for, it doesn't mean necessarily it was bad. And I appreciate, everything that Kings and now Codarts is giving me.
Right. And that reminds me of, the billionaires and the big business owners like Mark Cuban or an Elon Musk, and they argue that you don't even have to go to college. Uh, or
Hmm.
Cuban says you could go to a smaller college. You don't have to be in debt first of all,
Yeah,
in so much debt, but you get the same academic experience, but also what really matters is what you do outside of school, how you work towards your passion.
yeah, for
What are
sure.
the different ways you're upping your skills and learning about how to get towards your goal. That's the most important part, and I think for a lot of people who are thinking about their education and academic paths, it's sort of like a lot different forks down the road. There's different options you can do. There's no right or wrong, but it all comes back full circle. But it matters along the way. How do you remain passionate about what you do to work towards your goal? And I think that's a really important thing
Yeah.
to remember. And Carlos, uh, what are some lessons or inspirations from studying music? Now, I think it has been has it been 6 years now? What are some
Um,
lessons or inspirations from
in
studying music that has influenced your life and your thinking that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Wow, there's a lot. I mean, I've been doing this for a very long time. Certainly for one that perfection is impossible. Um, you can, and everything is based on balance. First of all, I think, of course, wanting to strive for more and wanting to strive for perfection is a wonderful and beautiful thing. It's a great drive and it pushes you to be better. But I think for sure there's a certain point where one must examine themselves and examine what they're doing and just kind of go, yeah, this is good enough. It's not perfect. It won't be perfect ever, but it will be good enough because I think there's just going to be a time where if you just keep trying to chase perfection, you're going to burn yourself out and you'll end up hating the thing that you love.
And I think perfection hinders progress. A lot of people, young people who maybe want to start a business or they want to write their own book, they want to start their YouTube channel, trying to make everything perfect before you even get the initial product out is a hindrance to working towards your goal. I think it's the fear of criticism or fear of
Yeah,
people not liking your work. At the end, it doesn't really matter because it's all a learning experience
exactly.
that you could use later on. And I think definitely just taking the first step, making sure that you you learn from that experience is the most important.
I think there's also something to be said certainly about people that really push for everything to be perfect. They're kind of constantly on the move, and a lot of the times I think a lot of people just need to slow down and look at themselves and just kind of see really how far they've gone and appreciate what they can do at the moment instead of focusing on what isn't good enough. To kind of just be like, okay, yeah, this isn't perfect for me. I sometimes struggle with some technical stuff. Yeah, my intonation is not perfect. I might be, there's a long run of notes and I miss a few, but what can I do really well? I say, I can look at a piece and be like, well, I love being able to play this part, and I think I can convey beautifully what's happening at this part. And I think that's a big thing for people to just kind of stand back and stop worrying about what isn't good or good enough and really just be able to appreciate what already is good enough and what they really can already do instead of what they can't.
Yeah, I think trying to be perfect and thinking what is good enough is actually this criteria that's set on maybe internally based on what society thinks. And I know that before we've discussed your music and you talk about the difference between a competition and a master
Hmm.
class where you're sort of
Yeah,
playing your music for a professor. Uh, in a competition, you feel very restrained, right? Because there's a criteria of what is perfect, what is good.
yeah,
and there's less room to express yourself there. And I remember you telling me that, and it really reminds me of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. No, I think it's for sure there's a difference in mindset and how you approach situations. One of the master classes, I'm afraid I don't remember who it is, but a student walks up, and they start to play, and then they mess up and they start to panic. And the teacher just kind of goes, "Whatever, man. Mess up. Mess up for me. I want to see you mess up. Because if you don't, there's nothing for me to work with. If you play for me and you're already 100% perfect, you don't need to be in this masterclass." So that kind of encapsulates how I feel about masterclasses as a whole. It's a place to improve and to share, what you can do with someone and look for advice and grow with the other musicians that are with you. On the other hand, I think competitions are sort of set up in such a way that you can't mess up. You must be completely perfect. And part of what I have an issue with competitions, is that, well, you're basing, obviously classical music has its conventions. It has its history, it has its traditions, and some pieces are expected to be played in some particular ways. You can't escape that. It has too much history to ignore. But even then, you're judging one person's individual interpretation against a sort of grid of other people's individual interpretations. I might interpret a piece one way and fully believe in it and try to play it that way, but if it doesn't match what the panel of judges think, they can criticize me quite harshly. And that's part of my problem with competitions, I feel, is that there is no universal, criteria for music. There can't be. And it sort of kind of perpetuates this idea that something like this, like art, can be judged in such a way, and that you can point at someone and say, yeah, you're better than the other person for X amount of reasons. And I think that kind of discourages the beauty of music making as a whole. If you walk into a competition and your primary thought is to be flawless and perfect and better than the other people here, and you're there because you want to prove yourself as a great artist or prove that you're better than other people, I think, well, the art itself has sort of been voided at the point. And so that's why I'm a bigger fan of masterclasses. The issue, of course, is that currently in the climate we live in with classical music, competitions are just a part of life. Auditions, competitions, that's it. You have to deal with them, and they're ingrained in the system. And all the greats, the greatest musicians we know, especially nowadays, kind of come out of competitions. And you can't escape that anymore. But yeah, I have my problem with them. I like master classes more. I think they're more fun and more relaxed.
All interesting stuff. Carlos, I always enjoy our conversations to hear how you're doing.
Yeah, totally.
In Europe, obviously, we study very different things. So I really appreciate the lessons that you've learned from studying music. Before we end off, is there a social media where you'd like to share with the listeners where they can find you?
Sure. I do have an Instagram where I post, I suppose, somewhat decent pictures. It's up to you to judge. But again, it's art, so you can judge, and I won't really mind. That is under Carlos Y, Carlos underscore WHYY. And you can find some stuff there. There's some music stuff tagged, but it's not primarily a music account. Not yet, at least. I don't know what I'll do with it.
All right. Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you so much for being on our show. This concludes episode 2, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Novice Experience. Our theme song is Concrete Jungle by Audio Binger. You can find us or reach out on social media at The Novice Exp. That's The Novice EXP. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on all your podcast listening platforms. Talk to you next time.